All right, welcome back to the channel. So, Errol Spence confirms that he was tired of the Terence Crawford distractions during the fight, and he says that he is open to a Shawn Porter rematch next. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So this is going to be fun. I'm glad that we got some clarification from Errol Spence Jr. over some things that he had been saying about Terence Crawford, because I was really concerned for a little while that Errol Spence Jr. was looking away from the Terence Crawford fight because a lot of the things that he was saying during the fight or in the lead into the fight with Danny Garcia. But he corrected it, and I feel a whole lot better. He also talks about Shawn Porter and how he's very open to a Shawn Porter fight, but I think you'll be surprised about who he said was his toughest fight. But first things first, and most importantly, Errol said that he was tired of the conversation around Terence Crawford during fights. And that's what I was really glad that he said that, because I had heard him say, like, after the Danny Garcia fight, I heard Errol say that he wasn't thinking about Terence Crawford. And I do believe he said that in a couple of different circumstances. But now he was on an interview with the PBC Premier Boxing Champions podcast. You can go check it out. It was like an hour and a half podcast. There's actually one interview with Derek James that was very good. And then there was another interview, a separate interview with Errol Spence Jr. was very good. And Errol clarified it. He was like, look, I don't mind talking about Terence Crawford when we're not having a fight, but when I'm having a fight with somebody, no, I don't want to talk about Terence Crawford because he's got somebody else in front of him, right? And that makes sense based on what I've seen and how I've seen the Errol Spence Terence Crawford conversation go. So take, for example, the first time that there was a real big push for people on Errol Spence Jr. specifically, saying that he didn't want to fight he didn't want to fight Terence Crawford. That was caused because after the Shawn Porter Danny Garcia fight, what was that, about 2 years ago now, when they were fighting for the vacant WBC belt, the belt that was vacated by Shawn Porter, by Keith Thurman. Errol Spence Jr. was there and got into the ring to call out the winner, either Shawn Porter or Danny Garcia. The winner of that fight was Shawn Porter. So Errol was like, I want to fight Shawn Porter. It's strap season. Let's make this fight. So Errol went into the ring, called out Shawn Porter. Shawn Porter said, yeah, we can do the fight. But then after the fight, Errol was at the podium along with Adrian Bronner, along with Gervonta Davis, and they were kind of clowning around. It was a very, very informal, press conference, it seemed, because, Errol was spending a lot of time on the mic, as was Gervonta Davis. And I do also believe that Jermell and Jamal were asking questions at the press conference. This is kind of a different press conference. And so the question started getting posed to him there. What about Terence Crawford? And that was the interview in which Errol Spence said the words that became infamous later on, which were, Errol Spence Jr., Terence Crawford's on the other side of the street. I'm going to clean up my side of the street, and then I'm going to go get Terence Crawford. And he was saying that at the time when he was calling out Danny Garcia, he was calling out Shawn Porter at that time because Shawn Porter had won the fight. But the whole plan for Errol Spence Jr. at that time was to fight the winner of Errol Spence Jr. and Shawn Porter and then go get the WBA belt, which at the time was still with Keith Thurman, but has now been passed to Manny Pacquiao. So even then, it was strap season. He said he wanted to get to be undisputed, and he was willing to stay at undisputed, right? And to fight for undisputed. But the pressure was put on him, I think, by Keith Thurman fans, because I don't know how many real Terence Crawford fans there are, on him to immediately drop everything else that he's doing and start talking about Terence Crawford. The same thing happened again during the Danny Garcia fight. Errol Spence Jr. fights. There's a bunch of people asking him about Terence Crawford. What you going to do with Terence Crawford? What you going to do with Terence Crawford? As a way, if it's not intentional, it's still the same result. it's having Errol Spence Jr. focus on something that is not the fight before him and a fight down the road, despite the fact that Errol said exactly what his plans are. So I'm really glad Errol clarified that he'd be willing to fight Terence Crawford, that he likes talk, that he doesn't mind talking about that subject and pushing forward with that fight, as long as the time that we're talking about it is sometime when he's not actively engaged in the preparation for a fight with somebody else. And I think that is only reasonable. Second reasonable thing that he said was that he believes that he would be okay with that, another Shawn Porter fight can happen. And he was asked in this podcast who he thought was his toughest competition to date. And that was really interesting because he said he thought that his hardest competition or hardest fight to date was Kell Brook, followed by Danny Garcia, and not Shawn Porter. But he did believe that the Shawn Porter fight could happen again, and that the fight between he and Shawn Porter would go very similar to the way that it went the first time, in the fact that it is be a very, very big dog fight. Now, I don't believe, some other people believe, that Shawn Porter won that fight or was close to winning that fight. I don't believe so. I just think what happened was Shawn Porter put on a better fight than a lot of people thought Shawn Porter was going to put on. And there's a lot of Errol Spence Jr. haters out there, so they're going to give the benefit of the doubt to pretty much anybody that lands a punch on Errol, man. And if he doesn't land a punch, it's kind of like a danged if you do, danged if you don't with Errol Spence Jr. and guys that are going to really get on him. But I understand why. He's got a tremendous fan base. He says what he thinks. As much as you guys want this dude to lose, he's not losing. I remember the whole conversation with the Kell Brook fight about how, his little pity pack body shots don't hurt. And, it's just, who did they compare him to? Jeff Left Hook Lacey. That's who they were during the fight between, in the lead up between to the fight between Kell Brook and Errol Spence Jr. People were saying that Errol Spence Jr. was going to be like Jeff Left Hook Lacey, and the Kell Brook fight was going to be like that. And Kell Brook, I guess, was going to be Joe Calzaghe. But, hey, man, it didn't turn out that way. There's a lot of Keith Thurman fans that were really high on Keith Thurman. Errol was the young guy coming up, calling him out. And, people started getting on Errol's bandwagon because it was clear that Keith Thurman didn't want to fight him. Shawn Porter didn't want to fight him. Danny Garcia didn't want to fight him. But look, dude, the dude climbed he fought himself to the top of the division, and he's there. Now, the truth of the matter is that pretty much everybody at the welterweight division that's not named Manny Pacquiao kind of has to sit and wait and figure out what he is going to do, because he has so many options inside the welterweight division and outside the welterweight division. But at the least thing we know, though, is that Errol is not at risk of becoming of legitimately ducking Terence Crawford, because I was concerned about that, man, because all of the numbers, the financials point to fights between Errol Spence Jr. and Manny Pacquiao, Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford. I mean, and Canelo Alvarez. The big fan push, and I think everybody, the best actual fight that could take place in the welterweight division between two welterweights is Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford. And I was just getting a little bit worried that maybe, Errol himself was getting so tired of the Terence Crawford conversation that he was just saying, nah, I'm not interested in him at all. As a matter of fact, he said something in the press conference that said, hey, man, I don't know why, if he's not interested in me, he needs to, keep his word. What's he doing here? No, we know what he was doing there. Terence Crawford is probably not too far off from signing with the PBC if he's not actively, being recruited by him now. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think. How do you think the Shawn Porter fight will go? What will be the next fight with Errol Spence Jr.? Is he ducking Terence Crawford? All those great conversations that we have. Do that in the comment section. Also, please follow me on Instagram and on Twitter. And with that, I'm out. Peace.